Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic tales every day. Liking this video helps us bring you more incredible stories, so smash that like button if you're ready for more. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of this story surprised you the most? Share your reactions in the comments. I love reading what you think. If you could add one twist to this story, what would it be? Let's get creative in the comments. What do you think happens next in the human versus alien saga? Let's discuss your theories below. Snow falls steadily across the shattered remains of Earth's once vibrant cities, blanketing the ruins in a bitter silence. Buildings that once reached for the skies now lay in crumbled heaps, twisted steel and shattered glass reflecting the last remnants of sunlight filtering through heavy clouds. The remnants of humanity's final defense lines are scattered across the streets, vehicles overturned, weapons frozen in the hands of lifeless soldiers, a grim testament to a battle long lost. Amongst the wreckage, faceless alien soldiers, their armor reflecting the dying light, move in rigid formations, ensuring the complete erasure of human resistance. Their movements are mechanical, efficient, and emotionless, a stark contrast to the chaotic destruction they leave in their wake. Above Earth, high in orbit, the imposing flagship of the alien fleet hovers, an ominous shadow in the sky. From the command center, General Vrak, draped in the regal insignia of his empire, delivers his message to the defeated world. His voice, cold and resonant, echoes through every remaining speaker, radio, and communication device. Humans, he begins, with a tone of disdain that cuts through the static. Your time is over. You were never more than insects, weak, divided, unworthy of survival. His words drip with contempt, a calculated insult designed to break the last vestiges of hope in the hearts of any survivors still clinging to life. He pauses, as if savoring the despair he knows his words are sowing across the remnants of Earth. You fought bravely, he continues, but it was in vain. Your armies lie in ruins. Your leaders are dead. And soon, your species will be nothing but a forgotten footnote in the history of this galaxy. The broadcast is global, reaching the few scattered groups of survivors hiding in bunkers, caves, and forests. In his speech, Vrak taunts humanity's failure to mount a meaningful resistance. He mocks their primitive technology, their fragile bodies, their inability to stand against the might of his empire. Flashes of burning cities flicker across screens, the final moments of humanity's once great metropolises. Soldiers falling, fortresses crumbling, the last lines of defense overrun by relentless alien forces. In a frozen wasteland far from the ruined cities, Sergeant Kane sits hunched in a small cave, the cold seeping through his tattered uniform. His face is drawn, his body battered, but his eyes remain sharp, focused. A small, crackling radio, barely operational, relays Vrak's words, each insult landing like a physical blow. Kane listens in silence, his breath visible in the frigid air, the weight of the general's words heavy in the air. Around him, the wind howls through the trees, but the sound is drowned out by the haunting echoes of the alien leader's voice. Kane's mind drifts back to the last stand of his unit. The final defense line had been breached days ago. He remembers the sound of artillery fire, the shouts of his comrades as they tried to hold the line. The screams as they were cut down by alien forces, one by one. Kane had fought until the end, his rifle running dry, his knife dull from overuse. But in the chaos, when the line finally collapsed, he had been pulled away by the force of an explosion, tossed into the wilderness like a discarded relic of a defeated army. Somehow, miraculously, he had survived, alone, injured but alive. The guilt of survival gnaws at him, an ever-present weight on his chest. His comrades are gone, his unit decimated. Kane clenches his fists, the cold biting into his skin, but the pain is a reminder that he is still alive, still breathing. And as long as he lives, there is still a chance, however small, however impossible, that he can fight back. His mind races with the memories of his fallen friends, the men and women who fought beside him, their faces flashing before him as Vrak continues to boast about humanity's extinction. The anger builds, rising like a fire in his chest. The general's words no longer cut, they fuel. They ignite a rage Kane has kept buried since that last, fateful battle. As the broadcast ends, the cold, mocking laughter of Vrak fading into static, Kane makes his decision. His body may be broken, but his spirit is far from defeated. He will prove Vrak wrong. He will show the General, and the alien empire, that humanity is not weak. Not broken. Not finished. There is still fight left in him, and that fight will become the seed of something greater. Pushing himself up from the cold ground, Kane surveys his surroundings. The cave is small, barely large enough for one person, and his supplies are running low. But he's survived on less. Outside, the wind howls and snow drifts against the trees, but something catches Kane's eye, a faint glimmer of light reflecting off something metallic. Curious, and desperate for anything that could help him in his fight, Kane moves toward the light, his body moving stiffly from days of cold and hunger. Hidden in the snow, half buried by the wind's relentless barrage, is a small alien patrol vehicle. Its occupants are long dead, frozen in their seats, victims of the harsh environment they underestimated. Kane approaches cautiously, his eyes scanning for any signs of life, but it's clear the vehicle has been abandoned for some time. He rifles through the supplies, finding alien weaponry, advanced technology far beyond anything Earth had developed. A pulse of hope surges through him as he realizes the opportunity before him. The aliens, in their arrogance, never expected a lone human to scavenge their tools for war. Kane carefully examines the alien tech. He's no engineer, but years of military experience and a sharp mind give him an edge. With a few hours of trial and error, he manages to power up a device, a small, handheld energy weapon. It's clunky in his hands, foreign, but it works. He tests it on a nearby tree, watching with grim satisfaction as it disintegrates the bark in a single blast. This is what he needs. This is how he'll fight back. Armed with the alien weaponry and whatever human supplies he has left, Kane begins to formulate his plan. He won't take them head on, that would be suicide. But he knows the terrain, the wilderness, the harshness of this world better than any alien invader. And he'll use that knowledge to his advantage. He will be the ghost in the snow, the unseen enemy that strikes from the shadows. He will chip away at the alien forces, one by one, until Vrak realizes that humanity is not defeated. Not yet. Kane looks up at the darkening sky, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. He whispers a quiet oath, not to any god, but to the memory of those who fought and died beside him. He will avenge them. He will show Vrak that humanity, no matter how battered, no matter how broken, will always rise. Kane tightens his grip on the alien weapon, his resolve hardening. Kane's breath was steady as he crouched at the edge of the frozen ridge, overlooking the narrow valley below. The snow around him was untouched, thick and pristine, masking his presence in the bleak wilderness. His eyes narrowed as he spotted movement in the distance, an alien convoy, creeping through the trees, their bulky vehicles slicing through the snow-covered ground. It was a supply convoy, lightly armed, but heavily laden with equipment and rations, moving toward one of the alien outposts that dotted the landscape. Kane knew this was his chance. Supplies were low, and he needed more than just food. He needed weapons, tech, anything that could give him an edge in the fight that was only just beginning. He shifted his position carefully, keeping low, letting the snow and shadows envelop him. Over the past few days, Kane had watched the aliens move through the wilderness. He had studied their patterns, their routines, their complacency. They moved in predictable routes, unchallenged and unhurried, secure in the belief that no human could threaten them out here. But Kane was different. He had learned to survive in this unforgiving landscape, adapting to the cold and isolation. The aliens had not. They relied too much on their technology, never expecting that someone might use it against them. Kane studied the convoy's formation, counting the soldiers and marking the vulnerabilities in their defense. The convoy had a few guards posted at the front and back, but the center, where the supplies were most heavily concentrated, was underprotected. He'd have to strike fast and hard, hitting them where they least expected it, then disappearing back into the wilderness before they could regroup. He didn't have much, just a few grenades, a knife, and the alien weapon he had managed to salvage. But it would be enough. He had his wits, and that would be the difference between survival and death. The hours passed as Kane waited, his body still and his mind focused. When the convoy reached the narrowest part of the valley, where the snow was deepest and the trees thickened, he moved. Silent as the falling snow, Kane descended from his vantage point, staying low, using the terrain to cover his approach. He placed his traps strategically, a combination of human ingenuity and stolen alien tech. Thin wires stretched between trees, rigged to explosives. The snow would mask their presence until it was too late. He had little time to set up, but precision mattered more than time in this kind of warfare. Every detail had to be perfect. When everything was ready, Kane took a deep breath and watched from his hiding spot as the convoy rolled into the kill zone. The leading vehicle hit the first trap, an explosion rocking the valley, sending metal and snow flying in all directions. The alien soldiers at the rear of the convoy scrambled to react, shouting in their guttural language, but Kane was already moving. He emerged from the snow like a ghost, his figure barely visible against the white backdrop. He struck with ruthless efficiency, picking off the soldiers one by one before they could regroup. A shot to the head from the stolen energy rifle. A quick slice of a knife to the throat. They never saw him coming. The remaining soldiers panicked, their disciplined ranks dissolving into chaos as they fired blindly into the trees, hoping to hit the invisible attacker. Kane used the confusion to his advantage, moving between the trees, using the terrain as cover, striking and vanishing before they could react. The aliens were unused to this kind of warfare. They were used to overwhelming force, technology that did the fighting for them. But here, in this frozen wilderness, none of that mattered. Kane knew the land, and he used it against them with terrifying precision. The battle was over in minutes. The few surviving alien soldiers retreated, abandoning the convoy, fleeing through the snow as Kane watched from the shadows. He didn't chase them. He didn't need to. The fear in their eyes told him everything he needed to know. They didn't understand what had hit them, and that uncertainty would be his greatest weapon moving forward. As they disappeared into the distance, Kane emerged from his hiding place and began to sift through the wreckage. The alien supplies were untouched, their vehicles now useless piles of scrap. Kane scavenged everything he could, taking rations, ammunition, and most importantly, more alien tech. As he examined the advanced equipment, Kane couldn't help but smirk. The aliens were overconfident, relying too much on their machines, their shields, their energy weapons. They didn't realize that their technology had its limits, and Kane had every intention of exploiting that. Their weapons were powerful, yes, but they lacked adaptability. In the hands of someone who understood guerrilla warfare, that tech became as much of a liability as an advantage. And now, Kane had enough supplies to survive the harsh winter and continue his campaign. His first strike had been a success, and with each passing day, he would grow stronger, while the aliens would continue to flounder, unsure of how to deal with a threat they didn't understand. Back on the alien flagship, General Vrak watched the report of the ambush with a mixture of irritation and indifference. A small convoy, wiped out in the wilderness by what appeared to be a lone human. It was a minor setback in the grand scheme of the invasion, nothing that could threaten the Empire's dominance. Still, Vrak felt a flicker of annoyance. The humans' tactics were primitive, but effective in this isolated incident. He couldn't allow it to spread. "Send in a hunting squad," Vrak ordered, his voice clipped. "Track down this anomaly and eliminate it. I don't want any more disruptions." His officer saluted and hurried to carry out his orders, but Vrak had already dismissed the matter from his mind. The human was nothing more than an insect, one that would be squashed soon enough. The Empire's victory was inevitable, and no desperate act of resistance from a single human soldier could change that. In the wilderness, Kane moved swiftly through the snow, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew the aliens would send more forces, and they would come harder next time. But he wasn't afraid. He had struck the first blow, and now, the war had begun. Kane's strategy was simple: hit them where it hurt, never give them a moment's rest, and force them to react to him. As long as they were chasing ghosts in the snow, they couldn't press their advantage elsewhere. And maybe, just maybe, he could inspire others to fight back. The aliens had underestimated humanity. That mistake would cost them more than they could ever anticipate. Kane felt the cold bite of the wind against his face, but he welcomed it. The harshness of the environment wasn't an obstacle to him, it was an ally. The snow, the trees, the silence, they were all weapons in his arsenal now. As long as he kept moving, kept fighting, the alien forces would never be able to pin him down. Kane wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning, and that realization filled him with a grim sense of satisfaction. For the first time since the invasion began, he felt a sliver of hope. Not for himself, but for the human race. Kane moved deeper into the wilderness, disappearing once more into the shadows, ready for the next strike. Kane's attacks grew bolder with each passing day. He no longer waited for the aliens to make mistakes, he forced their hand. Supply routes that once moved with impunity now became targets of sabotage. Alien patrols that ventured too far from their base never returned. Kane had perfected the art of guerrilla warfare, striking quickly and vanishing before the aliens could respond. His knowledge of the terrain and his tactical prowess made every strike more effective. He dismantled their communication systems, cutting them off from reinforcements and leaving entire sectors in the dark. When their signals faltered, panic set in. The first sign that his attacks were becoming a real problem came when he intercepted a larger convoy. He knew their movements now, their patterns predictable. But this time, they were prepared. Or at least, they thought they were. Armed with enhanced tech and a heavier guard, the aliens had clearly started to expect trouble. But Kane had already adapted. He had taken apart their weapons and understood how they worked, learned their weak points. Their equipment was powerful but fragile. And their soldiers were dependent on it, lacking the instinct and adaptability of a human fighter. Kane hit them where it hurt the most, at their supply points, at critical nodes where their dependency on tech was most vulnerable. He began targeting their refueling stations, sabotaging their energy reserves. Without fuel, their vehicles became useless hulks in the snow. Alien communication towers were disabled one after the other, leaving entire units stranded without orders. Soon, it wasn't just Kane taking out patrols. It was patrols sent to rescue patrols. The once smooth and seamless alien occupation was fraying at the edges, their forces spread thin and vulnerable to Kane's relentless campaign. His strikes were surgical, planned with the precision of a master tactician. He made sure to never hit the same spot twice in a row. Always moving, always staying one step ahead, Kane kept them guessing, kept them off balance. And with every successful hit, his confidence grew. The alien commanders scrambled to reinforce areas, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. And Kane used that to his advantage. He created chaos, exploiting their fear of being in the dark. Their soldiers began to whisper about the ghost, in the wilderness, a human they couldn't catch, couldn't see, but who was always there. But it wasn't without cost. Kane's body was beginning to betray him, the constant cold gnawing at his bones. His muscles ached, stiff from weeks of relentless movement. His hands, once steady and strong, now trembled from the biting cold and exhaustion. His food supplies were low, and every day, the gnawing hunger grew stronger. Despite his success, the isolation was taking its toll. It had been weeks since he'd seen another human face, and though his will remained strong, the long nights in the frozen wilderness were beginning to chip away at his sanity. The silence was oppressive, and sometimes he found himself talking aloud, as though his fallen comrades might still hear him. He fought to push through the pain, to suppress the voices that urged him to stop, to rest, to give in. But every time he felt his resolve faltering, Kane would close his eyes and remember the faces of his unit. The men and women who had fought beside him, who had died in that last desperate stand. Their sacrifice gave him the strength to keep going. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he had finally begun to make a real impact. Not when he had the chance to show these invaders that humanity wasn't as weak as they believed. But more than the pain, more than the isolation, was the fear. The fear that he might fail. That his efforts might be nothing more than a delay, a temporary disruption in an inevitable conquest. And yet, even in his darkest moments, Kane's defiance burned brighter. He clung to the hope, however small, that his actions could spark something greater. That maybe, just maybe, others would see what he was doing and rise up as well. Far above, on his orbiting flagship, General Vrak studied the latest reports with growing frustration. What had once seemed like a minor nuisance had now become a serious concern. The human, this one, lone soldier, had proven far more resourceful than anticipated. Each report of a sabotage or attack was a reminder that this inferior species wasn't as easily crushed as he had thought. The human's tactics were crude by Vraka standards, but undeniably effective. The constant disruptions were slowing their operations, and for the first time since the invasion began, Vrak found himself genuinely irritated. It was a blow to his pride, more than anything. A single human shouldn't have been able to cause so much damage. Vrak's officers suggested increasing their forces, saturating the area with more patrols, but Vrak knew that wouldn't solve the problem. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about precision. The human was clever, adaptable. If they flooded the area with troops, it would only spread them thinner, giving the human more opportunities to strike. No, this called for a different approach. Vrak leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he made his decision. It was time to send in the hunters. Elite squads trained for one purpose: to track down and eliminate threats. They would flush out the human, corner him, and destroy him. Vrak smiled to himself. The human would learn, just like the rest of his kind, that resistance was futile. As the orders were sent, Kane was already preparing for the inevitable. He knew the aliens wouldn't let his attacks continue unchecked. He had sensed the shift in their behavior, the increased patrols, the change in their tactics. But he wasn't concerned. If anything, he welcomed it. Let them come. He had turned their tech against them before, and he would do it again. He understood now that the aliens, for all their superiority, didn't know how to fight a war like this. They didn't know how to adapt, how to improvise. They were rigid, dependent on their machines and their orders. Kane had no such limitations. He could think on his feet, change his plans in an instant, strike from the shadows and disappear before they could react. The hunters came at night, moving through the forest with the precision and silence of predators. They were fast, heavily armed, and merciless. But Kane had been waiting for them. He had anticipated their approach, their tactics. As they closed in on his last known position, Kane triggered the traps he had laid days earlier. Explosions rocked the forest, scattering the alien hunters in all directions. In the confusion, Kane moved swiftly, picking them off one by one. Their advanced tech was no match for his knowledge of the terrain, his ability to blend into the environment. By the time the last hunter realized what had happened, it was already too late. Kane watched from the trees as the final member of the elite squad fell, his body disappearing into the snow. Kane had outwitted them again, turned their hunt into a massacre. He knew they would send more, but it didn't matter. As long as he kept moving, as long as he stayed one step ahead, they would never catch him. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the embodiment of humanity's defiance, a reminder that no matter how strong or advanced the enemy, humans would always find a way to fight back. General Vrak's patience had finally run out. His forces had failed him, their attempts to capture or kill the human thwarted at every turn. Reports of ambushes, sabotaged supply lines, and the deaths of his elite squads had reached him one by one, each failure more humiliating than the last. It was unthinkable that a single human could cause such damage, could evade capture so effectively. Vrak's pride, as much as his duty, demanded he take matters into his own hands. This insolence could not be allowed to stand. With a deep sense of self-assurance, Vrak descended to Earth. His personal shuttle cut through the atmosphere, gleaming under the dim, wintry sky. He made no effort to hide his arrival. Why should he? He was the general of an empire that had conquered worlds far beyond this primitive planet. Kane was nothing more than a nuisance, a rogue animal that had managed to evade capture, but an animal nonetheless. His arrogance was palpable as he stepped from his ship, his armored boots sinking slightly into the snow, his towering form a stark contrast to the desolate landscape. His soldiers flanked him at a distance, but this was his moment. Standing in the clearing, Vrak called out, his voice booming with disdain. "Human! Do you truly believe you can continue to defy us? Your resistance is pathetic. You are nothing compared to the might of the Empire. Come forward, face your defeat with whatever shred of dignity your kind still possesses." Cain, silent and unseen, watched the scene unfold from the cover of the forest. His body ached, his limbs heavy with exhaustion from the weeks of relentless fighting, but his mind was sharp. He could feel the weight of this moment, the culmination of everything he had endured. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was personal. Cain's hands tightened around the grip of the alien weapon he had salvaged, the cold metal familiar now, an extension of his own will. He stepped forward, emerging from the tree line, his figure small in comparison to the towering alien general. The two faced each other across the snowy expanse, the quiet tension between them growing. Vrak's lip curled into a sneer as he looked Cain up and down, as if the mere sight of him confirmed every lowly opinion he held of humanity. "This is the best your species can offer? A lone, broken man hiding in the wilderness? I had expected more of a challenge." Cain said nothing, his expression set, his gaze unwavering. There was nothing to say. The time for words had passed. Vrak's mocking tone washed over him, but Cain's resolve only hardened. He had survived too much, fought too hard to let this moment slip away. Vrak made the first move, drawing a massive energy blade that glowed with an eerie light. His attack was swift and brutal, his strikes backed by the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat. But Cain was quicker. He moved with precision, using the environment to his advantage, ducking behind trees, rolling through the snow, always one step ahead of the alien's powerful blows. Each movement was calculated, designed to draw Vrak deeper into unfamiliar territory, to wear him down without expending unnecessary energy. Cain's strikes were measured, targeting weak points in the general's armor. He fired bursts from his stolen alien rifle, each shot aimed to exploit the gaps in Vrak's defenses. But the general was no ordinary soldier. He deflected the shots with his blade, his confidence growing with each passing second. "You think you can win this, human?" Vrak snarled, his voice filled with scorn. "You are merely delaying the inevitable." But Cain wasn't trying to win a war of attrition. He was studying Vrak, watching for patterns, for any hint of arrogance in his movements. And it was there, subtle, but present. Vrak's strikes, though powerful, lacked adaptability. He was too reliant on his technology, too confident in his superiority. And that was his weakness. The battle raged on, the snow beneath their feet churned into a chaotic mix of blood and ice. Vrak pressed his attack, his frustration growing as Cain continued to evade him, landing precise strikes that chipped away at his armor, but not his confidence. Vrak couldn't fathom how this human had survived so long. Each second Cain endured was an insult to his power, to the Empire's dominance. Finally, Cain saw his opening. Vrak, in his rage, overextended himself with a powerful but reckless strike. Cain dodged, using the momentum to dive to the side, grabbing the one piece of salvage tech he had been saving for this exact moment. A small, experimental device he had found among the wreckage of a destroyed alien patrol. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but Cain had modified it, repurposing it for one singular use. In a single, fluid motion, Cain activated the device, aiming it directly at Vrak. A beam of concentrated energy shot out, striking the alien general in his exposed side. Vrak staggered, his armor smoking, his body convulsing as the energy coursed through him. His face twisted in disbelief as he fell to his knees, his weapon dropping into the snow. He gasped, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. "You, a mere human!" Vrak's voice was weak, filled with incredulity. "How?" Cain stood over him, breathing heavily, his body shaking from the exertion. He stared down at the fallen general, his face hard but devoid of satisfaction. There was no victory to be celebrated here, just survival. Vrak's eyes dimmed, his final breath escaping in a cloud of steam that mixed with the falling snow. The once mighty general lay still, his arrogance silenced forever. For a long moment, Kane stood there, his body swaying slightly, the cold finally seeping into his bones. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He looked up at the sky, where the alien fleet still hovered ominously above. He knew they had seen what happened. The death of their general would send shockwaves through their ranks. They would hesitate, they would falter. And in that hesitation, Kane saw the faintest glimmer of hope. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time since the invasion began, Kane felt something stir deep within him. He had shown them that humanity wasn't broken, that they wouldn't go quietly into the night. He had proven that even the smallest spark of defiance could bring down a giant. With a final look at the fallen general, Kane turned and walked away, disappearing into the wilderness once again. The snow swallowed his footprints, leaving no trace of the battle that had just taken place. But Kane wasn't concerned with leaving a mark. He knew what he had done. And so did the aliens. The fight would continue, but now, humanity had a reason to believe.